When you have loved ones or friends who need help handling their daily affairs, whether they are elderly or disabled, relatives or neighbors, and you believe they need a guardian to handle those affairs, and when all other alternatives aren't realistic or have not worked, it often becomes necessary to file what is called an interdiction in the Louisiana court system. In Louisiana, the legal term for a guardianship of an adult is called an interdiction. Your friend or relative is referred to as the potential interdict. The person appointed to be the guardian is called the curator. In addition, the court appoints what is called an under-curator, who has certain oversight duties. Video number 1. What are the alternatives to interdiction?
Interdiction is a very, very serious step. It's often referred to as the civil law death penalty, and something that serious is at the end of a very long series of steps. Bob, do you want to start with an interdiction?
No, you're first required to consider alternatives. Like Betty said, an interdiction, which is the same thing as a guardianship in other states, is essentially turning the person back into a child. You're taking away their rights. So it's a very serious process. It requires going to the court and filing documents and essentially filing a lawsuit against the person that you're interdicting. So it's serious. So one thing that you would want to consider in planning before you get to the interdiction stage, if possible, would be to do something like a power of attorney.
A power of attorney, can anyone do that at any time, Bob?
No. In order to do a power of attorney, the person has to have the ability, or I guess the legal term would be capacity, to understand what they're doing. And that person has to understand that, okay, I'm signing a document and I'm giving this person, perhaps a child, perhaps a spouse, or a trusted friend, authority to handle this particular business for me. Now, powers of attorney are different. You may have one for health care only, you may have one for banking only, or you can do one that handles all of your business with limitations. A power of attorney doesn't give away all of your rights. Actually, the power of attorney does not give away any rights. It just allows the other person to handle some of your business.
So a power of attorney is kind of like me as the employer. I am picking someone to do things on my behalf. Should that be someone I trust completely?
Absolutely. It has to be someone that you trust, and also you're not necessarily doing that person a favor. That person has a lot of responsibility. That said, you still maintain the responsibility if you appoint. The person you appoint is called an agent. That agent can do things for you, but if you want to tell that agent, do not do this anymore, you still have that authority if you signed a power of attorney. That is different from an interdiction. Once an interdiction is done, you've lost some authority to take care of yourself or your business.
When your loved one begins to show signs that their ability to function is becoming impaired, they can't fill out a check, don't really understand date and time, have you likely missed the window to execute a power of attorney?
It would be one of those gray areas. If the person is someone that you know and they trust you, and they understand, okay, let's assume it's your mother. All right, Mom, do you want me to handle this for you? Yes, and if you do, please sign this. Do not get a form off of the internet. You want to see an attorney that knows how to do that, and it will contain the proper language. And if Mom knows what she's signing and understands that she's given you the authority to handle this for her, then you can still do the power of attorney. But if that person is past the ability to make that kind of decision and to have that understanding, you do not want to do a power of attorney. You're past that.
With the power of attorney being possibly the easiest, fastest way to avoid an interdiction, are there any other ways?
Yes, and one thing to do in a planning stage, if you would, to get ready for this would be to, for example, on a checking account, have the trusted person added to the checking account as a named owner of the account. And it may have your mother, and it may have you and your brother and your sister all on the checking account. And that way the bank can speak to you about the account. You would have authority to write checks for your mother or your father or whoever's at issue and handle their business. That way you do not even need a power of attorney. So that's one major issue right there. If there's a retirement account, you talk to the retirement account person ahead of time and whoever handles your investments, and you can get on that account so that that person knows. So you do those things ahead of time, however. If you wait too long and the person's lost the capacity to understand, then you could be in a situation where an interdiction is the only option.
Now, a representative payee for Social Security purposes, in my practice, Bob, it seems like if you can figure out a way to become the representative payee for your loved one, folks that don't have multi-zillion-dollar estates, the representative payee can often, that will solve a lot of people's problems there. Has that been your experience?
I have not dealt with that. Is that something that you do ahead of time before the person loses capacity?
In a perfect world, it would be, but generally, it's the very last step trying to avoid an interdiction. If folks would realize that, the future is coming, let's prepare for it, unfortunately, it's not a fun thought oftentimes.
And you bring up another issue. If there is wealth involved and you have someone who's on Medicare or perhaps Social Security disability, if that person is to come into some money all of a sudden, they can lose their Social Security disability. They can lose some of their benefits. So if you're in one of those situations, perhaps not an elderly person, but a person with developmental disabilities, you really need to see someone that can help plan for that and perhaps set up a trust. What other options?
A first-party special needs trust, a third-party special needs trust, just a regular old-fashioned revocable or an irrevocable trust. There are 1,000 different flavors of trusts, and some will protect governmental benefits, SSI being very much a means-based program, a large judgment or settlement money coming into your loved one could disqualify them from those benefits. And talking to someone who genuinely practices in this area and knows the right answers will be a huge, it feels like all I'm doing is selling lawyers, but honestly the stuff is so complicated. If you go to the bank and a notary signs something, maybe you've just made a huge error.
We had a situation one time with a young man who was actually in his 40s who was developmentally disabled, severely so. He had been receiving Social Security disability benefits. He was in a safe place. He essentially had a happy life. And oddly enough, Social Security itself sent a refund to him. The refund was just enough to make him no longer qualified to receive some of his Social Security benefits, and had to engage somebody like you to help set up a special needs trust. There was no special needs trust at that point. Have you had situations like that?
It very common, where there's all of these rules out there and maybe 50 people in the state of Louisiana who know how they actually operate. So trying to avoid an interdiction, if you can do a power of attorney, I guess that's kind of the gold standard, getting a representative payee, possibly setting up a trust. It is so wonderful to live in the future, Bob. I have an app on my telephone that lets me get groceries brought to my house. I never have to leave. I don't have to talk to a human being. I just hit some buttons. That has turned out to be very, very helpful. Well, for me, because I'm lazy, but also for my clients, because they are very much in favor of staying in their houses and still eating and getting the things they need, even though perhaps they can't drive any longer.
Betty, tell us what are some more alternatives to powers of attorney or interdiction?
Well, one alternative that came about in the year 2020, it's referred to as the Duston-Gary Act. Mr. Gary was a young man in Mandeville, Louisiana, whose family did not like the harsh choices available. They knew that he didn't need to be interdicted. He didn't need all of his rights taken away. And in other states, a supported decision-making process had started picking up steam. The Garys brought this process to the Louisiana legislature, and they wound up changing the law. People can do that. It's amazing. The supported decision-making process is going to be appropriate for a very, very thin slice of the population. People who have a lot of capacity, but they don't really understand and can't make good decisions about certain aspects. They appoint kind of a board of directors to help out with financial matters, medical issues, figuring out transportation, work, a group of people who has agreed in writing to help, and they all get together and help the person who needs the assistance make a good choice. One thing that's very important to remember, though, a good choice can have bad consequences. You can make a good decision, you can make a bad decision, but you've had all of the help around you, and now through the supported decision-making process, you've heard everyone out, but it's still up to the individual to say what happens next. Way different than interdiction.
And so would that be appropriate in a case where the person has some capability of making decisions on their own?
To a great extent, yes, sir. A person who is comatose, who is in late stage dementia, that the supported decision making likely would not be proper in that situation. Now, before you even get to the supported decision-making level of assistance, there are many ways to help a person stay in their home and assist with their activities of daily living, getting home health care put in place, figuring out how the Lifeline necklace would work, if your loved one would even tolerate it. Some people hate stuff around their necks. Will a service animal be of any assistance? There are animals who can tell when a person is about to have an epileptic seizure. There are dogs who can tell when your blood sugar has gone down, things like that. That may help someone be able to stay in their home for a much longer period of time.
And can some of those be combined with perhaps an interdiction or perhaps a limited interdiction?
Absolutely. Even in a limited interdiction or a full interdiction, the idea behind the law is to keep the person who needs the help, to keep them in charge as much as possible and to have their voice heard as part of the decision making. But if they cannot handle their money, but they are able to get to the doctor and take their medicines appropriately, a limited interdiction only as to their property and leaving them available to make all of their personal decisions, that is something that can happen.
The law wants to require that we make sure that the person has as much and maintains as much freedom as we can allow, correct?
The law specifically requires we find the least restrictive means to help folks live their daily lives. And often that is not, by the time they've gotten to attorneys and lawyers, once the interdiction talk starts, generally their capacity is so low that your loved one really cannot help out anymore. There are also cases where the person is just so ornery, where they will not be helped. And not necessarily ornery. Usually they're scared and they don't understand what's happening and have very little insight into their own needs. If they can acknowledge some needs, they can be met with shopping services, animals, service animals, things like that. But until they recognize the need for it, you can't make someone take the help.
Now, what about the circumstance where you have a person who's being taken advantage of by someone?
You definitely don't want that to happen. And if you are aware that your cousin is treating your grandma very badly and possibly bullying her, acting inappropriately, it seems like you would have a duty. I know as attorneys, we literally have a duty to do something about it. It turns into a much harder discussion when there is financial or physical or emotional exploitation. Adult protective services, elder protective services, it might be a good time to call in those kind of resources.
Okay. And if you suspect that someone is stealing from the person, you can call the police, correct?
You can call the police. What I've heard a lot from clients is that when I call the sheriff's office, they tell me that this is a civil matter. My brother is robbing daddy blind. That's a civil matter because he's using the checkbook instead of some other more harsh means.
If it comes to that, at some point, though, it is time to go see a lawyer about doing an actual interdiction, correct?
It gets to the point where there's no other option. Yes, sir.
And interdictions are not in of themselves bad. We just have to make sure that we've considered the least restrictive means first.
And folks, if you're in the greater Baton Rouge area, the Alzheimer's services of the capital area, if you're in other parts of the state, the National Alzheimer's Association, they have a lot of resources, knowledge, and ability to walk you through some of these least restrictive means, trying to avoid the big lawsuit hassle. With the possibility of financial or other type of exploitation is very, very real. And some pre-planning can help avoid certain aspects of it. But if there is really a bad apple, an interdiction is possibly the only thing that's going to get that person out of your loved one's life.
And Betty, what about medical care for the person?
A lot of folks lack the insight to know that they need these medical services. There are doctors who will actually come out to the house. There are home health care services that can help folks stay at home longer. If a person has lost the ability to do a power of attorney, they need health care assistance. Louisiana has done something very, very helpful in the law. They've put in a special law that says here are all of the people who can help you with your health care issues. There's a direct hierarchy of them. I love the word hierarchy. First of all, the first person in line to take care of your healthcare business is you. If you can do it for yourself, the law says good for you. If you can't do it for yourself, the next person in line would be whoever the court has appointed as a curator, as a tutor, or otherwise to take care of your personal health business for you. The third person in line is your spouse. After that, any adult children you may have, your parents, your siblings, and then if there's some other relative who could come in. So the law has a lot of choices out there, and hopefully enough to accommodate most people who would be kind of caught short without the healthcare power of attorney in place.
And we have had situations regarding the consent law, however, where you may have 2 children and one of them disagrees with the other. Or we have 4 children and do you need all 4? Well, you need a majority. 3 of them can't show up, only one's there, and they will say something that the others disagree with. So that at times becomes an issue, which is another reason, if you have the ability to go ahead and do a power of attorney, to appoint a particular person to make your healthcare decisions. The healthcare power of attorney can be part of an overall general healthcare power of attorney, but if you're able to plan for this ahead of time, it can avoid some problems. You don't want to just have to depend on that consent law that you're talking about. Does each parish have a council for aging that can assist on things like this?
Yes, sir. All 64 parishes have a council on aging that provides, in most places, a senior center where you can congregate. They have meals on wheels. Often there will be meals available at the center as well. There are people there who have seen a lot of things and can serve as a significant resource for folk and someone close to home, not calling an 800 number that's based out of who can even guess where.
As you can tell, there are many alternatives to interdiction. For questions or more information on that, please see the link.
We appreciate y'all's time. Thank you very much, and we hope this was helpful.
Thank you.
A supporting PDF document of video number 1 is available at the Governor's Office of Elderly Affairs website, goea.la.gov. For next steps, go to video number 2. What do you have to do once you are appointed the curator?